Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are doing something a little different.
Yeah, a slightly different pace for us today.
Usually we are sprinting. We're trying to cram a semester's worth of economics or history or tech news into an hour. But today, I want to set a completely different vibe. I want to just slow the clock down.
We are taking a breath, a really long, deep breath.
Exactly. I want you, the listener, to imagine you've just walked into a quiet room. Maybe there is a comfortable leather chair, some low ambient lighting, maybe a lava lamp if you're feeling retro.
I love a good lava lamp.
Right. The world outside is noisy and demanding, but in here, we are just going to unravel the mysteries of the mind. And we're going to do it without taking ourselves too seriously.
Which is actually pretty ironic, considering the topic is usually treated with extreme seriousness. I mean, we are dealing with the nature of the soul, after all.
It is heavy stuff, for sure, but we are going to keep it light. Before we get too comfortable in this philosophical lounge of ours, though, I do have to do the housekeeping.
The necessary evils.
Always. So here is the official mandatory disclaimer. This podcast will be distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We aren't gurus. We aren't doctors. We are just two people fascinated by the source material.
And the source material today is quite a specific, really fascinating slice of history.
It is. We are cracking open session 314 of the early sessions, book 7 of the Seth Material.
Specifically, this session was recorded on January 25, 1967.
And we need to give full credit where it is due. This comes to us from the Seth Material and the publisher, the New Awareness Network. If you find what we talk about today interesting, and I guarantee you will, you owe it to yourself to go to the source.
Absolutely. Now, 1967. Let's just place ourselves there for a second.
Okay, set the scene for us.
It's the late 60s. The counterculture is exploding.
Yeah.
You've got the summer of love right around the corner. But in upstate New York, in a town called Elmira, you have Jane Roberts and her husband, Robert Butts.
Right.
They're living a relatively quiet life, except for the fact that Jane goes into a trance state and speaks for an entity named Seth.
And for those who might be new to this or maybe a bit skeptical, look, we aren't here to debate the metaphysics of channeling today.
No, not at all.
Whether you think Seth is a spirit or a fragment of Jane's subconscious or even just a creative fiction, the psychological insight in this session is what actually matters.
That is the key. The advice Seth gives here stands entirely on its own, regardless of where you think it comes from. It is incredibly practical psychology from a very unusual source.
And here is the hook.
Yeah.
Here is why I pulled this specific session out of the thousands available. It is because it addresses a trap that I think every single high-achieving person falls into.
The good student trap.
The good student trap. Have you, and I'm asking you, the listener, right now, have you ever tried really, really hard to be good?
Yeah.
To be disciplined? To be the perfect professional, the perfect parent, the perfect spiritual seeker?
You tighten up. You follow the rules. You repress the messy parts of yourself because you want to be better. You check your impulses because you think that is what maturity is.
Right. You hold yourself back. But what if that effort, what if that discipline was actually making you sick?
That is the central conflict of session 314. Seth creates this incredible argument that trying to suppress your natural personality, specifically your spontaneity, doesn't just make you boring. It can actually block your intuition and cause literal physical illness.
We are going to talk about the danger of being too good. And we are going to get to this amazing, slightly heartbreaking, but ultimately funny anecdote about why a psychic might think they aren't allowed to dance.
Which, when we really unpack it, is a story about why we think we aren't allowed to be ourselves.
So let's get into the text. The session starts in a pretty unique way. It's not a lecture. It opens with Seth commenting on something Jane and Rob had been doing in their spare time.
Right. So the regularly scheduled session on Monday, January 23rd, hadn't happened. They missed it. So in the interim, Jane and Rob decided to do a pendulum session.
Okay, let's pause right there. Pendulum session. For the uninitiated, this isn't, a grandfather clock.
No, it is a classic tool for accessing the subconscious. You take a small weight on a string or a chain, you hold it steady, you ask a question, usually a yes or no question, and you wait to see which way the weight swings.
And the theory is that you aren't consciously moving your hand.
Correct. It is called the ideomotor effect. Your subconscious mind makes tiny, almost imperceptible micro-movements in your fingers that cause the pendulum to swing.
So it bypasses the conscious brain.
Exactly. It is a way of bypassing that loud, noisy, conscious mind to get an answer from the deeper self.
It's almost like getting a subconscious text message. It bypasses the spam filter of your daily anxieties.
That is a great way to put it. And Seth opens the session by validating this. He says to Rob, quote, "The sessions with the pendulum are of great advantage. Your part in them is of particular benefit."
That is really interesting. He is actively encouraging the tool. He's not being precious about it, saying, hey, talk to me directly or nothing. He's saying, use the tool.
Because the tool facilitates flow. It keeps things moving. But then he pivots to something else Jane was doing, yoga.
Now, we have to keep in mind, this is 1967 in a small town in New York. Yoga was not on every corner like it is today. You couldn't just walk into a boutique studio next to a coffee shop.
Yeah, Jane was pretty ahead of the curve here.
She definitely was. And usually when we talk about yoga today, we think about flexibility or core strength or maybe stress reduction. But Seth gives it a very technical definition in terms of consciousness.
He does. He says, quote, "The yoga exercises are of great benefit. They aid in keeping the channels open between the conscious and subconscious."
I really love that framing. It is not just about being able to touch your toes. It is about keeping the internal wiring clear.
It's infrastructure maintenance. It's making sure the pipes aren't clogged up with daily junk.
But why does Jane need this maintenance so badly? Because this is where the conflict of the session really begins, right?
Yes. This is where Seth starts to diagnose the underlying problem. He notes that Jane, who he refers to as Ruburt, by the way, has a habit of ignoring his subconscious, trying to reach other centers, not by going through the subconscious, but by attempting to bypass it completely.
Okay, let's dwell on this bypassing idea for a minute, because I feel like this is the default mode for modern life. We tend to think of the subconscious as this scary basement.
The basement analogy is absolutely perfect.
Right. It is dark down there. There are old memories, there are weird impulses, there are spiders, there is that deeply embarrassing thing you did in 3rd grade that keeps you awake at night. We do not want to go down there.
We really don't.
We want to take the elevator straight to the penthouse. We want spiritual enlightenment, professional success. We want to be a clean, optimized person.
We want the final result without going through the messy process. We want the view from the top floor, but we refuse to walk through the lobby because the lobby is under construction and looks terrible.
But Seth is arguing that you cannot teleport.
No, you can't. He is very clear on this. He says, quote, "The subconscious is a doorway into other portions of the self, and it must be entered, and free access must exist to it."
It is not an obstacle. It is the door. You literally have to go through it.
And here is the warning. This is the part that hit me really hard when I was reviewing the notes for today. Seth explains what happens when you try to lock that door. When you treat your subconscious like an enemy or a nuisance.
It fights back.
Oh, it sabotages you. Seth says, quote, "The subconscious does this out of fear or resentment. It will actually block messages or distort material."
Wait, fear or resentment? That implies the subconscious has a personality. It has actual feelings.
Think of it like a neglected middle manager, or maybe the IT department at a big corporation.
Okay, I like this. Walk me through this analogy.
So you are the CEO. You are the conscious mind. You make the big flashy decisions. You wear the nice suit. You look good for the shareholders. And you have this middle manager, which is the subconscious. He handles all the logistics.
He does the heavy lifting.
Right. He files the memories, he regulates your heart rate, he manages your intuition, he keeps track of every tiny detail. He is doing all the grunt work behind the scenes.
Okay, so he's the guy keeping the lights on in the building?
Exactly. But you, the CEO, decide, you know what? I don't really like that guy. He is messy, he is emotional, he is not professional enough for the pristine image I want to project. So I am going to stop CCing him on emails. I am going to lock him out of the boardroom. I'm just going to pretend he doesn't exist.
I can definitely see where this is going.
What does that middle manager do? He doesn't just sit there and take it. He gets incredibly resentful. He starts losing your important files. He deletes critical emails. He causes a massive server crash right before your big presentation to the board.
Just to prove a point.
Exactly. Not because he is evil, but because he is screaming, I am necessary. You cannot run this company without me.
That is terrifyingly relatable.
Seth says this fear or resentment causes the subconscious to block the flow of information. So Jane, who is trying so hard to be this good, elevated psychic, is actually making herself a worse psychic because she has alienated the very part of herself that actually does the work.
It is a mutiny, a full-blown mutiny.
It's a total mutiny. And as we see later in the session, this mutiny doesn't just stay in the mind, it goes straight to the body.
Before we get to the physical symptoms, though, we have to ask the big question.
Yeah.
Why? Why was Jane doing this? Why was she so afraid of her own subconscious?
Seth does a bit of psychoanalysis here, which is really fascinating. He digs back into her childhood. He mentions what we could call the kindergarten connection.
What happened in kindergarten?
Seth says, quote, "When he was in kindergarten, his mother was just becoming ill. Now, if you know Jane Roberts' biography, her mother developed severe rheumatoid arthritis. It was a brutal, very debilitating illness.
And Jane was only around 5 years old.
Around that age, yeah. And for a young child, psychological boundaries are very porous. Seth explains that Jane developed a confusing mesh of identity. She felt responsible. She felt connected to that illness on a very deep level.
It is classic magical thinking. Kids think, Mom is sick because I was bad today, or Mom's pain is my pain. They literally absorb it.
Exactly. And Seth is very firm here. He tells Rob that Jane desperately needs to understand, quote, "He is himself and no one else. He is not his mother. They are worlds apart."
That is such a simple statement. But for someone carrying decades of childhood trauma, that is an absolute mountain to climb, the realization that you are not your parents.
It is huge, but the suppression wasn't just about ancient history from kindergarten. It was also happening in her marriage, right there in the present day of 1967.
Oh, what was happening with Rob?
Seth reveals something that Jane apparently wasn't even admitting to herself, and she certainly wasn't saying it out loud to Rob. He says Jane felt that Rob had, quote, withdrawn from him as far as his writing was concerned.
Rob was a writer too, right? Along with being a painter.
He was a painter and a writer, yes. And Jane felt that he just wasn't interested in her work anymore. But deeper than that, Seth says Jane had a, quote, need for warm daily affection, which she felt was suddenly missing.
So she is feeling lonely. She wants her husband to hug her, to ask about her day, to be engaged with her writing, just normal human stuff.
Yes, normal human needs. But, and this is the crucial part, she wouldn't admit it.
Why not? Why keep that bottled up?
Seth says, quote, "Of course he would not consciously admit these feelings, considering such sentiments were unbecoming on his part."
Unbecoming. That word carries so much weight. It is so stiff. It sounds like something a Victorian headmistress would say to a misbehaving student.
It is the good student rearing its head again. Jane thought, I am a spiritual pioneer. I am an independent modern woman in the 60s. I shouldn't be needy. I shouldn't need validation or attention. It is weak to feel lonely.
Wow. I really feel that. I think a lot of our listeners feel that too. How often do we swallow our valid feelings because we think, I am an adult, I shouldn't be upset about this minor thing?
It's like constantly gaslight ourselves. We tell ourselves we are above those petty, needy feelings.
And Seth says, what about this?
Seth says, quote, "He felt closed off, yet did not consciously think his feelings justified." So the feelings definitely existed. The subconscious was holding them, but the conscious mind stepped in and said, no, invalid, delete.
And so that middle manager we talked about takes those rejected, deleted feelings and stuffs them in a filing cabinet somewhere in the basement where they just start to rot.
Precisely. And this leads us to the biggest misconception Jane had. This is really the absolute meat of the deep dive today. It is all about identity. Jane had a very specific, incredibly rigid idea of what a psychic was supposed to look like.
Okay, paint the picture for me. What was Jane's ideal psychic?
Think of the ultimate stereotype. The guru sitting silently on the mountaintop.
Okay, I see it.
Calm, detached, untouched by trivial physical events. Highly disciplined, aloof, quiet. The kind of person who speaks in serene whispers and never ever gets angry or frustrated.
Right, the whole Zen master vibe.
Yeah.
Very controlled, no sudden movements. Everything is intentional and slow.
Yes, and Seth points out the glaringly obvious fact here. That is not Jane.
Jane was, well, not quiet.
Jane Roberts was a firecracker. Seth describes her natural state using words like spontaneous and intuitive. He says she naturally maintains an individualistic balance. She was energetic. She was highly emotional. She swore. She smoked cigarettes. She drank beer. She was chaotic, but in a very creative, vibrant way.
So she was trying to shove a wildly shaped, chaotic peg into a perfectly round, sterile hole.
She's trying to mold herself into a spiritual statue. She actually thought that to be a clear channel for Seth to do this holy work, she had to essentially kill off her own personality.
And that is so ironic, isn't it? Because her personality, that exact wildness, was probably the exact reason she was a good medium to begin with. The energy is what made it work.
That is exactly Seth's point. He says, quote, he has attempted to tamper with it. He attempted to make himself over and in a nearly disastrous fashion.
Disastrous fashion. That sounds pretty serious, not just a minor mistake.
It was incredibly serious, because when you fight your own fundamental nature that hard, when you declare an all-out war on your own personality, your body keeps the score.
And this brings us right to the physical symptoms. We know Jane struggled with symptoms very similar to our mother's, like stiffness, joint issues, mobility problems. And Seth connects this directly to this psychological suppression.
This mechanism is fascinating and honestly a bit scary to think about. Seth says that to Jane's subconscious, her natural, spontaneous personality began to represent danger.
Why danger? Why would being yourself be dangerous?
Because if she is spontaneous, she might slip up and say something unbecoming. She might get angry at Rob and start a fight. She might admit she's needy. She might dance, which we will definitely get to later. She might shatter the illusion of being the perfect psychic. So the subconscious decided to step in and help her out.
How exactly does the subconscious help in this scenario?
By applying a physical break. Seth says the physical symptoms were literally meant as, quote, checks against impulsive or intuitive behavior.
Whoa. So the stiffness, the inability to move freely, that wasn't just a random virus or a genetic inevitability. That was the body literally stiffening up its own joints to prevent her from moving too fast.
Yes. Listen to this exact quote from Seth. It is mind-blowing. He says, quote, he must then behave, he thought, in a measured, reasoned, quiet, calm, and disciplined way. And to see that he did, he slowed down the motions the body could make.
That is chilling. It is like putting a mechanical governor on a sports car engine. You are telling the car, oh, you want to race, you want to be wild. I'm going to mechanically limit your top speed to 30 miles an hour so you can't hurt yourself.
It is the most literal, physical manifestation of holding yourself back. We use that phrase all the time metaphorically. We say, oh, I'm holding myself back at work. But Seth is saying, no, if you truly believe that moving quickly and being spontaneous is wrong for you, your body might literally immobilize itself to ensure you behave properly.
It is the ultimate form of self-sabotage, but it is brilliantly disguised as self-control.
And Seth says this is the absolute heart of the matter. He says, quote, he should and indeed must be himself. Those qualities of his of which she became suspicious are those that made our sessions and his development possible.
So the very things she was trying so desperately to kill off, her spontaneity, her big moods, her chaotic energy, those were the actual source of her power.
Exactly. Without them, the whole project falls apart.
I really want to pivot here to talk about this discipline aspect. Because I think in our culture, especially right now, we absolutely worship discipline. We love the grind set. We love the guys waking up at 5 a.m. to take an ice bath. We love the stoic, unbreakable routine.
We really do. We equate discipline with morality. If you are highly disciplined, you are inherently a good person. If you aren't, you are lazy or bad.
And Jane was clearly influenced by that same kind of thinking. Seth mentioned she was bringing up old adages from her adolescence to control herself.
Right. Things like, slow down, use discipline, count to 10 before you speak.
And there's this incredibly funny, very specific detail in this session where Seth mentions the time this backfired spectacularly. He talks about the Jesuit and the cat lover.
Yes. This is such a great, incredibly human scene.
Set the stage for us. What actually happened?
So apparently, Jane and Rob had some guests over to the house. One of the guests was a Jesuit priest, and the other was just described as a cat lover, which presumably was a friend who just really liked cats.
Okay. A Jesuit priest and a cat lover walk into a living room. It sounds like the start of a very strange joke.
It really does. And the circumstances in the room were perfect for a session. The energy was high. The conversation was flowing. Seth says, quote, I had something to say each time. Seth was hovering right there, ready to pop in and drop some profound wisdom on these guests. But Jane blocked it. She slammed the door shut.
Why? Why would she block it if the energy was right?
Because of the guests. Specifically, probably the Jesuit priest. She felt she had to be proper. She couldn't just spontaneously roll her eyes back, go into a trance, and start channeling a spirit entity in front of a Catholic priest unless it was a very controlled, solemn, pre-planned environment.
She was worried about what they would think. She was worried about being too much or being seen as crazy.
Exactly. She applied that forced discipline and restraint. She chose social propriety over her intuitive flow. And Seth says, rather sadly, quote, those moments are gone.
That is actually tragic. Those moments are gone. The insight that could have happened, the connection that could have been made with those people, it is lost forever simply because she was afraid of looking weird at a dinner party.
It is sad. And Seth's verdict on discipline here is really nuanced. He doesn't just throw discipline out the window and say, do whatever you want all the time. He says Jane has a, quote, natural inner discipline, which can be counted upon when he leaves it alone.
So he's making a huge distinction between forced discipline and natural discipline.
A massive difference. Forced discipline is imposed from the outside. It is rigid, it is rule-based, it is driven by guilt. It is the voice saying, I must do this because it is the socially acceptable thing to do. Natural discipline is entirely organic. It flows from your actual interest and your passion. It is the discipline of a musician playing the guitar for 6 hours straight because they are obsessed with the song, not because someone forced them to practice scales.
And Seth argues that by overcorrecting, by constantly using that forced discipline, Jane lost her spontaneity and her joy.
Which leads us directly to what I like to call the better mistake theory. This is my absolute favorite part of the entire session. It is a brilliant rule of thumb for life.
Seth basically compares the risks. He looks at what happens if you are too restrained versus what happens if you are too spontaneous.
Right. He literally weighs the pros and cons for her. He says, quote, if you err, it is far less dangerous to err on the side of spontaneity than it is to use too much restraint.
Let's break that down. Why is restraint considered the dangerous one?
Seth explains it perfectly. He says, quote, too much restraint could eventually make the abilities inoperable. Basically, if you keep clamping down on the hose, eventually the water stops flowing entirely. You choke off the source. The whole system just dies.
Okay, so the risk of restraint is total blockage, a complete failure of the system.
Correct. Total shutdown.
And what is the risk of spontaneity?
Seth says, quote, too much spontaneity at worst could only cause some embarrassing moments.
That's it, just embarrassment.
That is literally the worst case scenario. You blush.
So the choice we are all facing is, do you want to lose your soul and your physical health, or do you want to occasionally look a little bit silly in front of a Jesuit priest?
And the tragedy is that for Jane, and for so many of us listening right now, we are so utterly terrified of looking silly, of being embarrassing or cringe, that we actively choose the blockage. We choose the stiffness. We choose the silence.
I will take the awkward silence at a dinner party over the spiritual blockage any day of the week. I would much rather tell a bad joke that lands totally flat than just sit there and never speak at all.
Exactly. Seth is telling them, you are taking this whole spiritual pioneer thing way too seriously. The stakes just aren't as high as you think they are. If you let go and something weird comes out, so what? But if you hold back, you destroy the very channel that makes you special.
He also mentions that ability grows as it is used. It is like a muscle that needs exercise.
Yes. He says, quote, the ability grows as it is used. Not to use the ability in the face of subtle or spontaneous impressions can, under certain conditions, impede your progress.
If you feel a strong intuition to say something or do something and you stomp it down because your brain says now isn't the time or that isn't logical, you're basically training your intuition to shut up.
You are sending an email to the middle manager saying, I never want to hear from you again. And eventually, he stops calling, he stops sending the memos. You are flying blind.
So we have covered the really heavy stuff today. The physical symptoms, the blocked emotions, the deep-seated fear of the subconscious mind. But then Seth ends the session with this incredibly delightful, charming little detail that just perfectly encapsulates Jane's entire struggle.
The dancing.
The dancing. I absolutely love this visual. Please tell us about the dancing.
So apparently Jane loved to dance. Or at the very least, she had a strong natural impulse to just dance around the house, just moving her body to music, being free.
But she stopped herself from doing it.
She did. She shut it down.
Why? I mean, what is wrong with dancing in your own house?
Seth says, quote, as a side issue here, he did not feel that dancing was seeming for a psychic, you see.
Seeming, meaning appropriate or fitting for the role.
Right. In her very rigid mind, the high priestess of the universe does not do the twist in the living room. The Oracle of Elmira does not boogie in the kitchen while waiting for the coffee to brew. The serious mystic does not shake it. It lacks dignity.
It sounds so ridiculous when you say it out loud, doesn't it?
It sounds completely absurd. But think about the invisible scripts we all follow every single day. We tell ourselves, a serious CEO doesn't wear mismatched socks. A respected academic doesn't read trashy romance novels on the train. A good, selfless mother doesn't want to go out alone on a Friday night. We have these incredibly strict rules about what our chosen role allows us to do.
And Seth just effortlessly dismantles this whole concept.
He completely tears it down. He says, quote, Ruburt is himself, and this self has strong psychic abilities. It is dangerous to attempt to make the self into what it is not.
Basically, you don't have to be a silent, fasting monk on a mountain to be highly spiritual. You can be a loud, chain-smoking, beer-drinking writer who likes to dance to the radio, and you can still be incredibly profound.
In fact, Seth would argue that being that authentic, messy version of yourself is the only way to be truly profound, because that is where your actual energy is stored.
The energy is in the joy. The energy is in the movement. It's not in the restriction.
If you block the dance, you block the psychic ability. They both come from the exact same well. You can't put a lid on one without suffocating the other.
That is such a massive relief. I feel like I can just exhale hearing that.
It is pure permission. It is permission to just be human, permission to be messy and loud.
So what does this all mean for the listener today? We have gone through the session. We have seen the absolute danger of suppression. We have seen the middle manager revolt and shut down the servers.
I think the biggest takeaway here is to take a hard look at where you are applying the brakes in your own life.
Yeah. Where are you stiffening up? Where are you playing a role instead of being a person?
Seth states it plainly, quote, "Without spontaneity, he did not operate effectively or well. We have been trained to think spontaneity is reckless. We think it is unprofessional or immature. But Seth is completely reframing it as the primary engine of health and effectiveness."
If you are feeling stiff right now, whether that is physically in your joints or mentally in your creativity, maybe it's not because you need more discipline. Maybe it's because you need significantly less.
Maybe you need to stop checking yourself at every turn. Maybe you need to just dance in the kitchen, even if you think it's unbecoming. Even if the Jesuit priest is watching you through the window.
Especially if the Jesuit priest is watching, give him a show.
Exactly. Give him something to talk about.
And look, we have barely even scratched the surface of what Seth talks about.
Yeah.
This is literally just one session. Session 314 out of hundreds and hundreds of recorded sessions. The Seth material is absolutely massive.
It is staggering how much content there is. It covers the nature of reality, time, consciousness, dream reality, health. It is a rabbit hole in the best possible way.
So consider this your mandatory call to action. Don't just take our word for it. We are just two people giving you the summary.
Please don't stop here. Go directly to the source.
We strongly encourage you to study the Seth Material books directly. There is so much nuance in there, literally sentence by sentence, that a conversation like this simply cannot capture.
And you can find them very easily. Visit the New Awareness Network website. They are the publishers keeping all this incredible material alive and available. You can go to sethcenter.com/the-early-sessions.
Let me repeat that. That is sethcenter.com/the-early-sessions. Seriously, go check it out. It is an absolute treasure trove of insight.
It really is. It will change how you view your own mind.
So as we wrap up this deep dive today, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
We talked a lot about Jane playing the character, the serious psychic, the rigid role she thought she had to play to be worthy. I want to ask you, the listener, directly, what character are you playing right now?
That is a really good question. We all have one.
Are you playing the stoic father who never needs help? The perfect mother who never complains? The corporate shark who has no emotions? The chill guy who pretends he never cares about anything just to avoid getting hurt?
And more importantly, is that acting performance making you tired? Is the effort of holding that mask up making you stiff? Is it actually making you sick?
If the answer is yes, maybe it is time to drop the act.
Let the middle manager back into the boardroom. Give him a promotion.
Exactly. Go do something entirely spontaneous today. Break the script. Even if it's just doing an embarrassing dance move in your kitchen while you make dinner tonight.
Especially if it's embarrassing. Embrace the cringe.
Especially then. Thanks for hanging out with us in the deep dive today. Stay loose, everyone.
See you next time.